Welcome to another episode of Up To. 9 years ago, Up To started as a live event series showcasing leaders who are as humble as they are successful. The humility piece is extremely important as we identify leaders who can inspire others. We try to focus our interviews on the non-business aspects of their lives. And in doing so, we have found there's a real thirst to explore their hearts and minds in atypical ways. Our host, as always, is Adam Kaufman. And on this episode, we are joined by Shelby Coffey.
During the first season of the Up To podcast, I had several companies and entrepreneurs approach me about potential partnerships, but I'm really selective before choosing to do something like that. One choice we did make, happily, is to partner with Vivid Front, a full-service digital marketing and website design agency based in Cleveland that works with both local and national brands. They've built their entire client base on referrals, and they've won a lot of awards, including the 2019 Inc. magazine Top 5,000 Fastest Growing Companies, North Coast's Top Places to Work, and several others. They're known for their talent, they're known for their creativity, they're known for their culture, a firm I liked before we agreed to partner together for the show. Check out vividfront.com, or you can email me and I'll introduce you to their dynamic leader, Andrew Spott. Our guest this morning is from Lookout Mountain, Tennessee, but who lives today inside the Beltway, near our nation's capital. Early in his career, he was a writer and then editor at the Washington Post, where he spent 17 years. He's also been an editor at U.S. News and World Report, the executive vice president of ABC News, and as president of CNNfn. Our guest is perhaps most known for his leadership of the Los Angeles Times newspaper, one of the nation's largest and most important papers, where he earned an Editor of the Year award from the National Press Foundation due to his respected leadership of that paper during a time when they covered major events such as the L.A. Rodney King riots, the Northridge earthquake, and the O.J. Simpson trial. Wow, you covered some serious content there. He has served in leadership roles with the Newseum, one of my all-time favorite D.C. museums, with the Freedom Forum, and with the Pacific Council on International Policy. Maybe we'll get into that a little bit. A serious newsman in the truest sense of the word, and someone I have wanted to have on the show since we began Up To 4 seasons ago. He is the proud husband of an emergency room physician, and he possesses this uncanny combo of sophisticated intelligence and hilarious wit rarely have I experienced with anyone else. And I've told you that before. I'm super excited to have this legendary journalist and friend in studio with us today. Shelby Coffey, welcome to Up To.
My honor.
What have you been up to?
I've been up to two things during the pandemic, a lot more reading, and in fact, it has brought out a new family tradition. Twice a week, each member of the family, an individual, will pick her favorite essays, short stories, poems, and we get on the phone and read to each other for an hour. And that one person expresses her personality with that. We've liked it so much that we're going to continue it post-pandemic.
Awesome. What's something that stands out that maybe you were surprised a family member read or that you guys all resonated with in terms of an essay or a poem?
One of the most interesting ones was my wife finding, she is a scientist, and so she found the way in which our Neanderthal genes in some people have been able to help them not fall victim to COVID in as serious a way. This is continuing and ongoing research, so it's not fully set. But those who have more Neanderthal, and I happen to know exactly how much I have thanks to Ancestry DNA, the children voted it higher, but I was able to show them the science.
So you do this in a Zoom or on a traditional phone call?
Traditional phone call, because not everybody wants to get ready for their hair.
I don't like to do Zooms because I don't like to have my hair always, done up at the perfect scenario that it needs to be for video. I don't know.
A wise choice.
I don't know if you can relate. Yeah. Okay, so you have done so much. I don't know where to begin, but I guess I'll start with a lot of your work, Shelby, has been in the public eye. I had a NFL quarterback on this show before, and I was talking to him like, what is it like having 60,000 people immediately grade every move that you make in work? Most of us work, and then maybe your customers see the result, or your coworkers, or stakeholders, or investors, but not 60,000 people in a stadium. You, in various roles you've had, have even a larger audience that sees the result of your work. Like, what is that like, dealing with that pressure, or do you get immune to the pressure of knowing you're going to have so many critics?
Took me a while to get used to that. I remember one of the first negative articles about me in a local magazine in Washington, in which other people who did not like me saying bad things, and a friend of mine said, "What's it like to be hated like that?"
Right.
And I said, I try to think of it as if that's an effigy of me, meaning like a straw man, a version. They don't know me because I mean better than they think I do.
Right.
And yet it's always worthwhile to pay some attention to how you project. And I don't think I ever got really used to it, but in a lot of towns, if you're editing the biggest newspaper, then let me go kick the shins of that guy, says the local village voice type thing. But eventually the skin hardens, or you find a new line of work.
Because I'm so sensitive. I mean, I don't think I could do that. If I had one person upset with something I say or something I wrote, it would really internalize. So I guess you do have to get used to it if you want to stay as editor of the LA Times or head of the Washington Post section that you were the head of CNNfn. I mean, there's so many critics, and even more now with social media, where anonymously people can say that you're an idiot, and I imagine you just cannot read those things.
I think that has really added to it.
Yeah.
The Twitter mobs
Right.
looking for a particular statement, and the anonymity gives an added vehemence to the comments.
Right.
So I've had friends who've been hounded by them. Luckily, I'm not much in the
Twitter sphere.
gun range at this point.
The gun range. Good metaphor. You did tell me, and we were doing a preliminary call about today, that you've had major actors call you when maybe they read something in the LA Times that you were responsible for. Speaking of the gun range.
A couple of funny things, yes. Charlton Heston used to call with some frequency because he read the paper section by section, the Los Angeles Times, in between swimming his pool laps. And he was always very courteous, and he was rarely pleased, but he would put it well. It's, "Shelby, I'm very disappointed by
Great
this."
voice.
And that voice, which I, of course, associated as a moviegoer with Moses or God,
Ben-Hur, right,
was quite compelling. But we had a good relationship, and it was part of the fun of being editor there in that.
Do you
city.
think this public eye affected how you behaved, or what type of work output you did create, or did you just go with your gut regardless of what criticism might come?
I've always thought that major media outlets like the LA Times or ABC News, you both lead and reflect your audience, meaning you want to, as Henry Luce said, you want to make people read what they ought to read. And so it's a matter of enticing. Likewise in broadcast. So you can't be too far ahead of them. But if you are a mere reflection, then you're pandering, and you're not doing the kind of extra coverage you should.
That's the echo chambers that are too common today, that people only listen to others they agree with. And
I think it's a very good point. And what we have now are many silos because of the internet and because of social media, where you can go and find that fast 20,000 people who agree with you on almost any
and reinforce whatever bias you have.
Yes, yeah. And they get each other ginned up, and so that's a very different ecology to the body politic of America and to communications, mass media broadly.
Did you always know that you were going to be in the news? Or was there something early in your career that pushed you in that direction, or was it a mentor, or how did you end up following journalism?
A happy circumstance. I was at the University of Virginia and had written...
You were a student there or teaching? Or
a student,
okay.
Undergraduate, and had written for the campus literary magazine. There was a great short story writer, Peter Taylor, who was there, known as the American Chekhov, and he encouraged me. And by an odd circumstance, Walter Pincus, whose name you might know from his many years at the Washington Post covering national security, at that point was the editor of the Washington Post magazine. This was in the mid-'60s. And he wanted somebody to write about the University of Virginia's legendary party scene, how tame it seems now. And through a friend of a friend, they said, well, here's a guy who can write fairly well. And so I rushed out and bought the New York Herald Tribune of sainted memory, where Tom Wolfe was writing.
Wow.
And Tom Wolfe he was just on the uptake, and it was the new journalism. And that was, the aim of that was to use the literary techniques of short stories to liven up magazine articles, but to also stay true to the facts in a journalistic way. And so I did my best to imitate some of those.
Kind of a fun assignment.
Oh, it was
for
great.
Your first story.
Yes.
You had to do some research. You had to get a beer bong and go around Charlottesville.
We stuck more to Tennessee sipping whiskey in those days.
Okay.
Not so much beer, guys.
Okay.
And it was great fun, and it was well received, and so Walter had me start writing some other articles come up for the summer. And I remember his wife, Ann Pincus, who's from Arkansas, a good friend of the Clintons, and very lively woman, and she had a party for all the people who were helping Walter on the magazine, and I got a very small little ashtray for being Rookie of the Year. Funny things, how it happened.
Do you still have the ashtray? That's a nice keepsake.
I have it in memory, if not in fact.
Man, that's tremendous, though, that pretty early, I mean, age 20 or whatever you were as an undergrad, I think they call it third year or fourth year at UVA, but the Washington Post was your first
Yes, and so
byline.
As it happened, that coincided with the ascent of Ben Bradley.
Okay.
As
the legendary editor.
Yes, he had appointed Walter, who was a very good friend. And so when I graduated, I applied to the Post, and Ben had liked some of the, I admit, kind of flashy writing. In retrospect, we all look at our youthful prose.
Flashy?
And say,
like, what do you mean, like colorful words, like bigger than you needed, or what do you mean?
I enjoyed the color of stories and the way in which people, and it was, as I said, the time of the new journalism, and so you had much more of the emotion of events, the rawness of people and their changing social mores, and that was great fun. So I was hired into the sports section.
Yeah.
And became a writer there, and that was before
was that pre-Thomas Boswell? Excuse me.
Thomas Boswell and I were the kids in the sports section.
I don't even like baseball, but I used to just love his baseball columns about the Orioles. This is pre-Washington's baseball team for me, and I just think he was the best.
He was the
coverer
best.
Of baseball.
A brilliant guy, has remained a friend all these years. And I told him,
Todd.
I told him he has ruined going to baseball games for me, because I went with him and his wife and my wife to a Nationals game. The women talk about their issues
Yes.
off to the side, and Tom does a running commentary of the game. He knows every hitter as he comes up, his psychological issues, his problems with his agent,
Wow.
what the management's thinking about him, his problem with curveball, and it is nonstop. He knows every element of it. And as you know, when a person has deep expertise, even if it's not something, I'm not a deep baseball fan. Boxing, on the other hand, is another matter. But the enthusiasm and expertise is just remarkable, and that he had that for his entire 40-plus year career, and was, I think, by common consent, one of, if not the best baseball writer.
I think you're right. Yeah, I'm no expert on that.
In the Hall of Fame.
Yeah. So you are now bringing up a topic that I planned on asking about. You've covered sports, as we just acknowledged. You've covered...
Is that like an admission or something?
No, it's great. No, I mean, I still read. I still get print editions of 2 newspapers to my home. I'm an oddity for my generation.
If there were only 80 million more people like you, this country would
and part
be
of
a
it
lot
is for
better
the sports page.
Yeah.
But no, it's not an admission of anything guilty, but rather maybe the Charlottesville drinking story is actually. So yeah, that one is.
I was a mere observer.
But what I wanted to ask you was, did you feel most alive covering sports or financial topics, because you also did CNNfn, or political affairs, or is it hard to even pick a favorite kind of storyline that you covered? Because you've done some people, like you said, Boswell is like just a sports guy, or Tony Kornheiser never does politics. You've done different things.
The range is
impressive.
Good for me. No,
it's impressive. I'll say it. You're being humble.
It's good for me. I like different things. But as you mention it, I think of sitting behind Muhammad Ali in his late years as he came into the Staples Center and happened to be in the seat in front of me for one of Oscar de la Hoya's fights. And the roar of the crowd as he came in, as he walked across the arena, and then sat down, and I could see why some of the great boxers, including Ali, never quit on time. They don't stop.
The adoration is hard to turn off.
Because how could you ever turn that off voluntarily? Not very easy. I think also political conventions, though they're now big PR shows, there is something about the roar of that crowd. When Bill Clinton was being nominated, or watching Jesse Jackson give one of his speeches. There are marvelous elements. I liked the Wall Street people. I remember we had in Jeff Bezos. CNNfn was very much like CNBC. It was CNN Financial News.
I remember,
And Ted Turner had wanted to start it because he had been held back from buying what became CNBC. So then the plan was he would buy NBC, and then they would be merged together. And I remember to this day having Jeff Bezos on in the late 90s. He had just recently, some months earlier, been on the cover of Time magazine, and seemed to be the new wave. But now, the tech crash of 2000 had hit.
Okay.
And he came with that booming laugh of his and said, Wall Street says the model's not working. The model's not working for Amazon. And he was, legitimately looked like maybe this is one of those stories where you go from hero to zero in a couple of quick years.
Yeah, I remember, because early on, Amazon lost more the more books they sold. That was the broken model that he was referring to. And
while investors were ready to bet on the future come 99 and 2000, as you recall, suddenly that future with pets.com and other failed companies going under, that didn't look quite as good.
Right.
And I sometimes think about that. I've known him a little bit over the years since and thought, what a smart,
So were you
brave
interviewing
guy.
him? I'm sorry I interrupted you a minute ago, but so were you telling me a story about you were interviewing him at that time?
I didn't interview him. I was talking to him in the green room.
At CNNfn.
We interviewed him,
Yeah.
meaning the anchors were interviewing him.
Got it,
But we
got
had
it.
a long talk.
Yeah.
that
So
day.
you're giving me different examples of what's good about sports or business or political news coverage. But you paint a good picture about the adoration of a Muhammad Ali entering, the Staples Center. I can imagine that. And the political conventions, while euphoric, that's very rare. Usually if a president walks into any room during a presidency, whether it's Clinton or Bush or anyone, they don't get that roar of like the athlete coming in. You mentioned Charlton Heston, and I wasn't planning on bringing this up, but in my past, I had exposure to Mr. Heston too, and he was president of the NRA when I was at the NRA. Mm-hmm. And when we would walk down the street, and this is referring to the adoration you're talking about,
Right.
we would walk down the street, and he would be like any mid-70s-year-old man. He might have a sore knee that was making him a little moody, or he might, be hungry and he wants to go eat, or what? He's a human.
Sure.
But as soon as a fan came up, he lit up like the movie star that we both think of Charlton Heston as.
Right.
Whether the young lady was 21 or 81, they all loved him. And that adoration, it's kind of like the Muhammad Ali adoration. It must be hard to give up, so it'd be fun to cover that kind of stuff.
Yes. I think it would be hard to give up, but it's demanding on the person to turn it on, and I'm sure it becomes a reflex in some ways, and then you think, I just want to go. I just want to go get a cup of coffee.
Hey, let's go sit down somewhere. I'm grateful that Coffey, Halter, and Griswold has once again agreed to partner with us. With offices in Ohio and Washington, D.C., this full-service national law firm focuses on all aspects of business and the law, including corporate and finance, intellectual property, and government relations. Let me be clear. I actually approach companies with whom I would like to partner. We just don't accept marketing dollars from anyone. I have been referring my CEO and entrepreneur friends to Coffey for years. I really believe in the firm. One of their notable practice areas is in mergers and acquisitions. And recently, for instance, I introduced a successful entrepreneur in the Midwest to Coffey when he told me that a European-based conglomerate wanted to buy his business. Coffey works with large corporations as well as privately held companies throughout the U.S. and Canada and in Europe and Asia too. So whether it's selling your own business or the more routine needs of creating your first will or anything in between, this firm can really do it all in terms of legal needs. Once again, the firm is Coffey, Halter, and Griswold, and you can find them at calfee.com or on the Up2 Foundation website. Has there ever been in your career that has spanned the sports, the business, the financial, like we discussed, has there ever been like a big why in the road where you had to decide, should I go this way or that way? I believe, God has a plan, but we all have free will to go left or right or to take this call or not take this call. Was there ever a big moment where you could have gone a couple different directions? I do hear a lot of feedback from the show listeners who are younger in their careers, and they like hearing about how successful people navigate these whys in the road.
It's a good question.
Thank you.
And I have gone through several whys in the road, as you can see, looking at the checkered career.
No, it's not checkered. I mean, you started working for the Washington Post in college. That's pretty cool.
Well, I mean it as in it had some variety, and each of those had choices involved.
Right.
Not all of them were right. I learned two things, meaning, for example, when I went to be editor of the Dallas Times-Herald, as it turned out, there was an oil recession on. People tended to forget that in the mid-'80s, and it was West Texas Intermediate crude went below 10, and that was quite a problem in Texas. And so the paper was sold by Times-Mirror. That led to me going to the Los Angeles Times and, in effect, entering a contest to become the next editor in a couple of years, which was demographically set because the editor had a 65 retirement. And no guarantees whatsoever. It turned out much better. So what I try to tell young people seeking advice on these things is it often will seem like this is a momentous choice. I've got to do this, and if I guess wrong, dreadful. Actually, a lot of times you may not get a good bounce on what you choose, but it's how you play that bounce. Everything is in how you play the bounce. You get good ones that you didn't expect and maybe didn't even deserve, and bad ones you don't deserve either. But keep punching. The second thing is I think we all can be subject to analysis paralysis, trying to think about, should I go red or should I go green? And the unusual piece of advice I read and then started using and found very helpful, and I'll explain why it's helpful, is a use of game theory for decision, but applied simply to office and career type decisions. You're torn between two things. The pro-con list, they're helpful, but often don't lead you to anything other than,
because you can be biased. I've done it in creating what are the pros and what are the cons.
Right. So
to fit an answer you're already hoping you give yourself.
Oh, very interesting. You're right. The greatest con artist we'll ever meet is ourselves.
Oh, my God.
So
like
the game theory says, in this context, write down, if I choose choice A, I am most afraid of this result.
That's interesting.
If I choose choice B, I am most afraid of this result. And then you choose the least worst. Now, why is that useful? I'm not saying it's the absolute tiebreaker,
but it's a tool. It's a tool.
But it's a tool which counteracts what is our natural optimism on our choice and our anxiety. And so by saying, okay, view it from the pessimist standpoint and say, both of these could turn out badly. What's the least worst? You have given yourself another tool.
So let's apply that very interesting tool. The Dallas scenario changes because of the oil prices going down. The economy is really hindered. You then are recruited by the LA Times, or did you go after that?
The interesting point, I was recruited to come back to a major magazine and also to a major newspaper at the same time on the East Coast, and the Los Angeles Times wanted me to try for a place, but I had to talk with the top people there, and ultimately the job offer was a step or two back, actually, from what I had been.
So was that a big decision to take that?
Was a big decision.
And did you do some pros and cons, or if I choose this, what's the worst thing that can happen?
A lot of thinking about it, and what eventually decided me was I loved the idea of Los Angeles. I'd always been crazy and remain an LA patriot despite many mean things said by Easterners, and I'm looking at people right here in this studio who are snorting.
Todd, our producer, not me. I live in Ohio.
And so to some extent, I was just short of 40, and so I thought, well, I have time in mind. There are other things I can do. If it doesn't work out, I'll do something else. And so took the chance.
But you're married. Excuse me, I'm trying to paint. So, this is a big decision, though, to move your family to L.A. You have kids at this point.
Right.
Yeah, that's a big decision.
Well, and my wife was an emergency room doctor, and one of the interesting things about the medical systems in states that at least at that point, had high immigration to them in California and Florida and Texas and other places, is they want to make it as hard as possible for other doctors to move in. So you have to take more boards. You have to go get licensed. We had to go walk it through.
So this is a
Sacramento.
complex Y in the road.
Complex Y in the
Yeah,
road.
yeah.
And my wife, to her great credit, as she would say now, I have licenses in practically every state in the union. She later got it in New York when we moved back there. But she also said, once I'd gotten to the museum and Freedom Forum here in Washington, which was where she wanted to settle, a couple of other places came calling, and she said, "You can take the job if you want, but I've shaken my last corporate hand for you."
Yeah, message received. Yeah,
And
I get that. I'm sure that led to you laying some roots, right? Right.
back to Washington, city of my birth. So
Yeah.
I'm not a bit unhappy.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about that. I know your father's father was a United States senator.
Actually, my mother's father.
Your mother's father, excuse me. And so you're back in the city where you spent a lot of your youth. But before we
Right.
get to that, you've mentioned boxing a few times. What does boxing do for you that your journalism doesn't?
Well, I think, like most American males of my time and place, I like sports. And boxing, somehow the Friday night fights of yore with Gillette sponsoring, intrigued me. And I guess it is the nature of conflict, the athleticism, and strategy once you become interested in it. That also the characters are amazing. Boxing, as some people have called it, is one school calls it the sweet science, another school calls it the red light district of sports. But as in red light districts in general, very lively characters. The speed and rise and fall of fortunes is very
point.
interesting. And
When Buster Douglas with one punch takes out Mike Tyson out of nowhere. I mean,
Right.
That's the speed of a rise and fall of somebody. Yeah.
and then Buster losing his title
Right.
the next
Pretty
time out.
quickly.
And as a result, my son also liked it, so that has kept the
That's good.
pleasure of it. So part of our fun in Los Angeles would be to go up to Las Vegas for the big fight weekend
Wow.
with the PR man Bill Kaplan and the promoter Bob Arum, and we'd go to dinner after the fights with George Foreman.
Isn't it amazing how big mixed martial arts is now? We have 2 teenage boys, 2 of our 3 kids, and not only them, but like all their friends. Everyone's got a favorite MMA guy, or
Right.
they're all doing some sort of mixed martial arts themselves in various levels of, good or not, challenging or not, but still, it's so huge. More than boxing.
It has come on.
Yeah.
It has come on in a big way, and it's definitely the probably coming on. I think boxing will maintain
Okay.
as a major sport. You still have extremely good people doing it, and possibly it is the primal conflict between 2 men
One-on-one.
or 2 women.
There's no
nowadays.
team. That's right. Yeah.
Yes.
And you can't hide, in business or even on teams, a weaker person is still on the team. But in that scenario of the ring, there's just one against one.
It's
like
right
you said,
there.
male or female. Right. And there's a known winner at the end, and I guess we can debate who wins. That's one of the reasons I've always liked elections, actually, political elections. Legislative campaigns sometimes can go on forever.
Right.
But an election, we know it's November 3rd or November 4th, whatever the date. It's a very black and white winner.
You feel you know that now.
Yeah, that's true. I guess lately the presidential races haven't been that way, but you know what I mean. Like, at the end of the day which side wins and which
Right.
side doesn't win. And I've always liked that about political affairs. You still live and operate in the Washington, D.C. area, and I know you're often asked to comment on political affairs and just current affairs in general. But I wanted to ask you, what was that Asian policy organization that I referenced at the beginning that you were a past board member of? Do you have a particular interest in Asian affairs?
Was very interested in it when in Los Angeles.
Okay, that makes sense.
It actually is called the Pacific Council on International Policy, and it was set up as a West Coast relative, a cousin of the Council on Foreign Relations.
Via USC, I think?
Yes.
Yeah.
Abe Lowenthal, a very good professor at USC, started it.
Okay.
And he had been in the Council on Foreign Relations, which I'm also a member of and have been a member for a number of years. But because of geography and because of different interests, the Council works hard to cover a broad field, but it was seen as better to have a West Coast-based organization.
Kind of a think tank? Should we simply put it as a think tank? Or
it had studies groups, and also, like the Council, would pull together professional staff with members to address, for example, Chinese trade policy.
Got it.
Or
Okay.
Japanese relationship to military
Okay.
defense. How big should it be? And then would have public forums
Sure.
for people. So for people interested in foreign affairs, both organizations have.
So that makes sense when you were in L.A. that was extremely relevant to you, more so maybe than now that you're here in the East. Do you think there's an area of current affairs that you gravitate towards the most now? Do you have something that's really stimulating you right now?
I think, like everybody else, the policy in the Middle East has been dominant, but I remain interested in Asia because at the time, with the Los Angeles Times, we had a syndicate, meaning we would put out columnists and other elements that newspapers would buy. Our most famous and most profitable was Henry Kissinger. And
so just to explain, and make sure I understand it, so you would have a staff writer at the LA Times that could then have his article appear somewhere else.
Well, in this
newspaper.
case, they would be people who were columnists. They would not be LA Times employees per se, but we would sign a contract with them. So these would be experts. It would be cartoons, bridge columns, all of those things. So the LA Times syndicate then had salesmen who would go around the world, and they were fascinating.
So Henry Kissinger was one of
Henry Kissinger
he was your talent.
The tip top. And,
I've heard of him.
And it was great fun to get to know him. Over that time, he would maybe once a year come into town, call up for lunch, and it set up my theory of cross-coast fame and what you want to do. For example, my sister had shot a movie with Jamie Lee Curtis. And one day at Duke Zebert's, which was then the hot restaurant in Washington, Jamie Lee Curtis is in town promoting a movie. And Duke Zebert finds out that my sister had shot the movie, and Jamie Lee, who liked my sister, stood up in the middle of the place. Everybody's looking. Sonny Jurgensen, Edward Bennett Williams, all the big mockers are there. And she starts walking, as in slow motion, as in a movie, towards me. And she said, "You're Ann Coffey's brother. I just want to thank you." I had such great...
Wow.
Even better, John Travolta was sitting back at the table, nobody looking at him. He was having lunch with her. So that was great. Now, I've been at restaurants with Jamie Lee Curtis on the West Coast, and, we're L.A. people. We're cool.
No
We're not
big
going to
deal.
get all excited.
Yeah.
But one time when Henry Kissinger called me for lunch, we went to what was then the hottest restaurant in L.A., Patina. And the place goes wild. It was near the gates of Paramount. And the owner came up to me after and said, "I can't believe it, Henry Kissinger. This is
Isn't
great."
that interesting?
Yeah, and
The political
and had,
figure.
Jamie Lee come in or Arnold Schwarzenegger, it's okay. You know,
Right,
they'd be
right.
at Paramount, so
Right.
what? Yeah, we're cool. And so all you need to do is get the famous person out of their usual spot, and
Henry
wonderful
Kissinger
things
was
happen.
a legendary writer after being a public servant. I think his last book on China was like 1,000 pages or something. I
It's
found
shorter
it
than that.
but it's longer than 500 pages.
It is longer than that. But he was schooled, and it is a brilliant book, a wonderful book. And he has been great fun to know. I saw him, I think it was a few years back at the Kennedy Center Honors, and I hadn't seen him in person for a while. "Oh, Shelby, how are you doing?" So I told my wife, I said, "Oh, wasn't that nice? Henry remembered me by sight." And she said, "You never forget somebody who's paying you $1 million a year." So,
Yeah, he better remember you.
no, he doesn't have to.
You mentioned former Secretary of State Kissinger. Is there anyone you're reading now? I don't ask just my journalism friends. I ask everybody, what are you reading? Who are you being stimulated by? What form do you read? Is it online? Are you still buying books? I'm a product of, I still love newspapers. I told you that.
Right.
I still buy books. It drives my wife crazy a little bit. We have so many books in the house. But how do you consume content, and what are you consuming?
A range.
In addition to the Up To podcast, which I know you are always
Up to
listening
podcast is on 24/7. Down
Lord.
our
Help your family.
our cat and our dog are a little upset by it.
Oh, gosh.
I'm for good and for ill an omnivore. I still like certain kinds of books that I'm trying to learn from and mark up. I have, in later years, at least while they were going, given cruises, cruise lectures. And so certain books I like for that. So, for example, I read To Start a War by Robert Draper, which is a comprehensive look at how the Bush administration went to war. He's interviewed everybody. It's about 18 years after, so you can get
I like
more
Woodward's
material.
Bush at War around the same time frame by Bob Woodward.
Yes.
And
Well,
I'm-
I've read all of Bob's books
And I
as
know
well.
you're interviewing him soon. We're
Yes,
going
I'm-
sidebar for a minute, but I know you're interviewing Mr. Woodward soon.
Yeah.
And you are a good interviewer.
Well, you're kind, but we'll give it a try.
But do you have any tips on being a good interviewer? Considering where I'm sitting at the table today?
I think you know what you do well. The key is asking the question quickly. I got this from Jim Lehrer, and then listening and asking the question off that, rather than a mistake I used to make more often. When you're working up your 20 questions, then they become sort of a tyrannical checkbox
Right.
list that
Want it to be more
you're trying to get
conversational.
through, and so you miss that somebody has said something kind of amazing, worth following up.
So it's not horrible that I interrupted you right now to follow up on the Bob Woodward stuff,
No.
even though we're still talking about
And
something else.
I've read all of Bob's books.
Yeah.
I'm plunging into Peril right now, his
yeah,
latest,
brand new.
which has gotten a lot of publicity. The other book I've read that is similar to To Start a War, and I just passed this on for Washington people. There's a book called King Richard by Michael Dobbs, who was at the Washington Post, a very fine correspondent over the years. They are of British extraction originally, I believe. But Michael, in much the same way Draper attacks the decision to start a war, is able to get all of the tapes and do circles in on the first 100 days of the second Nixon administration, when he has won this tremendous, one of the biggest electoral college victories ever. He's on top of the world. He's opening to China, SALT Accords, and yet there is this problem right there in the foundations of the mansion, and you can see, because he synthesizes it so well, and both books are relatively fast-paced, which I appreciate
Yes.
as somebody who likes to read books but has, the runway's getting a little shorter. I've got
You got to be selective about how you spend your
books.
time, right?
Yeah.
Is it always nonfiction books, or do you also enjoy fiction at all? You mentioned Tom Wolfe earlier.
Oh, yes. I do like fiction, and it's a sort of a different thing. I started while I was editing newspapers. I would have the first edition brought to my home at 10 o'clock at night. It started at the Washington Post because you were always afraid, would they write a headline that had the word shirt in it and leave out the R accident. Oh, my God, how could it stay on? We caught it in the first edition, Mr. Bradley. Don't worry.
Have you ever had to say, halt the presses?
Close enough.
Yeah.
I think when Princess Diana died, I had to say, start the presses, because some people on the desk were so holding on to the copy, trying to get it just right. I said, run it without. We got to get the presses going. So after going through the paper, I liked to, as almost a palate cleanser, go to a different world. And so a really very fine fiction writer, certain detective novelists I've always liked, and literary fiction of different sorts.
I've admitted that I still read newspapers in print. You're talking about books. Do you do any online reading? Or
No,
maybe
I was going to say I shifted to Kindle for much of my fiction reading. I find that lighter and easier, and also it's better for my wife.
Yeah, if you read
so
at
that
nighttime.
that I'm not keeping the light on.
Right.
We've had.
How about the future of journalism? Is it all going to be digital? Is there a future for newspapers? Are we going to need more barons like Jeff Bezos to buy the Washington Post? Or do you think there's room for print in this digital world that we're in? I'm hoping there is, but I'd really love your opinion, having been through so much of this.
I hope so, because I like it. I'm cautious about predictions, especially about the future, as Yogi Berra says, because in the early days of the internet, we were very bullish on the future in the print, because we thought, well, we'll shift and we won't have to buy all this paper from these Canadians who are charging us very high prices, and all these trucks, and we're going to be rich. And what we didn't quite realize was we had not a monopoly position, but if you were a strong newspaper in a town, you had a very strong position for advertising.
Yeah, big brand.
To the higher demographics, as well as everybody else. And so you were sought after. And what the internet did was open all of these other ways for advertisers to nicheify and so we were no longer the major element.
You weren't the distribution channel for the advertising at that point.
In the same dominant way. And likewise, you've seen it all. My guess is that for some years, paper will appeal to the people who can afford it. Let the New York Times, bless their hearts, raise it up to $100 a month. I'll pay it. Don't tell them. I'll pay $150 a month. I'm going to have, because when I was 8 years old,
you probably know the Sulzbergers. I don't. We won't tell them.
I do, and there's a reason. The Sulzbergers, actually the Ox family, who was the original purchaser of the New York Times, were in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And Mr. Ox bought the Chattanooga Times, which was the paper I grew up with, looked just like the New York Times, the same typeface and everything, as a boy. And I was given a writing prize at age 8. An Adolph Ox Prize for $5.
So you were a prodigy at age 8 already.
No, but I liked writing, and my family loved reading.
You're being humble.
Bunch of lawyers, and so it was all in the air. But that stuck with me all through grade school, high school, and so on. Maybe I could do a little of this stuff. The irony, of course, as I've told Arthur Sulzberger, is that the one North Star, the champion in American journalism has always, in modern years, been the New York Times. And if there was one paper we wanted to knock off its perch at the Washington Post, it was the New York Times. And when I went to the Los Angeles Times, Otis Chandler, who was the great publisher and the family owner, had specifically said in his memo taking over, setting out what he wanted to do, was, we want to knock the New York Times off its perch. Not meaning to
it's a competitive thing in business,
but to do that, to aim for the champion.
Top dog.
So in this ironic way, the Ox and Sulzberger family have been the goads to whatever success I've been able to have, but also they've done a remarkable job. And Arthur would say, to your question, for many years he has said, I'm platform agnostic. What I care about are that the values that have made the New York Times and other top-flight media institutions great matter most. Is it quality journalism? Is it evidence-based? Are you giving context? Are you giving comparisons that matter to readers?
Double-checking sources and so forth. Have you thought much about, you mentioned you only have so much time joking about what you should read.
Yes.
Have you thought much about maybe in the past one of those whys in the road that you could have gone this route instead of that route? Or maybe the better way of asking it is, if you could give your younger self some advice now that you're a little bit older.
74, pressing 75.
God bless you.
It happens.
You have so much more hair than me. You look awesome. I didn't know. I honestly didn't know that was your age. But what advice would you give? Joking aside, what advice would you give your younger self?
My younger self or any younger self? Two separate questions.
You're talking to the young Shelby Coffey.
It's going to work out better than you could think. It has.
Okay.
And my wife and I, obviously, during this past year and a half, it's a time of some reflection.
For sure, for all of us.
The one luckiest thing I did, and this is part of one of my talks, is on the life philosophy of Warren Buffett, whom I've known a long time. His daughter used to work for me. And he has a wonderful set of things. I won't give them all, but I will say a key is marry well. It matters more than you think, and as we know, you don't always know. The person that you marry may be quite different in 10 years. It doesn't always work out, but in our case, it did, and so we are able to look back after 2 children and both having had careers with some successes and a full taste of the experiences, and feel good. And so that I suppose, would it have relaxed me more? I was, like a lot of people,
ambitious and driven, right?
Yeah, driven to do well, to be seen to be doing well. Jump to the next thing if this one doesn't appear to be working. It worked out, but I don't know that if I had known that, if I would have relaxed too much.
Well, it's good. It sounds like your advice isn't
keep your center.
Yeah, keep your center. It sounds like it's nothing about regretting anything, which is wonderful. A lot of times I ask that question, and people regret that they did this instead of that. So no, you're just reaffirming your path, and you're saying with optimism, relax a little bit, it's going to work out fine. So I think that's good advice for all of us.
Studies show psychologically people often, not always, but often in their 60s and 70s, a certain amount of peace comes with their life. Not necessarily because of the choices they've made, or did they wind up number 2 or number 3 on the totem pole, but because they realize that happened.
Right.
And as Dick Cheney once said, you don't get do-overs in life.
That's interesting, though, that you're saying that about the studies and people reflecting with some happiness. in my 30s and then early 40s, I found myself around a lot of people older than me professionally, calling on them for various things, and I would envy them. I would kind of wrongly just see their life in a brief snapshot and maybe how professionally successful they were or how financially affluent they were, and I would envy these mostly men for all the stuff that they seemed to accumulate. But then once I got to know them better, whether it was after some work engagement we did together or having cigars or just getting to know each other better, I would often find that these hard-driving, super ambitious, accumulated lots of stuff guys, they were broken inside, whether it was their third marriage or they were distant from their kids, and none of them told me they wished they worked more.
Yes.
All of them said the opposite. I should have spent more time at home, and I didn't hear you say that in your answer, which is great, but there are a lot of uber successful, financially successful people who don't reflect on their lives as positively as you seem like you are. So I feel good about that for you.
Well, regrets, I've got a few, but still too few to mention.
Okay, good.
And I think work can become a refuge.
Yes.
And every form of refuge has its price.
Right.
And that's worth keeping in mind, that you need to have some center well outside work, because I think it was one of Tom Johnson, who was the head of CNN and who chose me as editor of the Los Angeles Times, a great man, one of the world's greatest bosses as well. And he said, don't put too much of your sense of self in your job, because your job can be taken away from you through no fault of your own, or the market goes wrong. It's any number of things can happen. But choosing something that is a goal outside, and I think he was using something I've seen adapted in books. For example, one guy whose life at work was good but not scintillating, you wouldn't be reading about him in Business Week, set the goal early in his life that he wanted to swim, let's say, 15 of the major rivers in the world. He wanted to climb 10 of the mountains over 10,000 feet. And he set that, and oddly enough, without ever becoming a wealthy guy who could jet around and do that kind of adventure trekking, he was able to do it.
That's good
in
advice.
his life.
Yeah, so don't.
And you can adapt that to, I want to help an orphanage get on its feet, or what have you.
Don't be identified just by your work life.
Setting something that that motivates you in a major way outside your work life.
What has that been for you?
I got the advice too late. No, I didn't. I never set some major thing, but I think looking at it, the major through line has been my family, my wife, and our children, with whom we have that wonderful thing. They're in their 40s now. My daughter just turned 50, and we're great friends with them. And so
that's priceless.
We spend time, and that's been going on for well over a couple of decades.
Awesome.
So,
well,
pleasure.
You mentioned Mr. Johnson, your former editor and boss, as a great
publisher.
man.
Yeah.
I was going to say you're a great man.
No.
And I'm grateful that you came into our program today. It's always shocking to me how quick the time goes. So thank you, Shelby, for being with us today. I've looked up to you for many years, and you've made up to a better show by having you present today. So thank you.
As I said at the start, Adam, my honor. You make all your guests feel honored, and thank you for putting forth the great set of lessons, advice, and amusements that make a terrific broadcast.
That's so nice. We're going to make sure Todd turns up the volume on that last sentence there. That was great and
Can't
unexpected.
We cut that?
Yeah.
I thought that could be cut.
Thank you. Thanks, Shelby.
All right, take care.
Thank you for listening to the Up To podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe via your podcast platform of choice. To receive our newsletter, suggest speakers, and give your candid feedback, please email Adam directly at adam@up2foundation.org. We would love to hear from you. The Up To podcast is produced by the BL Media Group right outside of the nation's capital in Washington, D.C. See you next time.